Today, I'm going to come back to the question of what is a strength training exercise? Now, in episode 2, we talked about how it's the intensity you perform the exercise at which makes it a strength training exercise, not necessarily the exercise you choose. And that is the most important concept of strength training, is that intensity. So it's, have you taken the muscle group you're trying to target to the point of muscular fatigue? If not, you're probably not going to get any stronger. If you are, it's those last few repetitions that are actually building the strength. Like I say, I went into a lot more detail on this on episode 2, and that is a vital episode if you haven't already listened to that. So whether you jump back and do that now, or whether you do that after you've listened to this, then please do that. I will link to that in the show notes or in the description below. But today I want to talk to you about the exercises. What exercises might you include in your strength training program? The short answer is there is no wrong answer. You can choose whatever exercise you want in there, and as long as you're doing it at the right intensity, you'll build some strength. However, we might want to be a little bit more strategic in making sure we've picked enough exercises to cover the whole body so that you're not leaving any crucial muscle groups out of your strength training program. So when we look at strengthening exercises, there are a couple of different types that we might want to select from. So we've got movement patterns that we can try and include. So these movement patterns will use multiple muscle groups to form that movement pattern. So an example is a squat exercise. You're combining the strength of your quads and your glutes in order to be able to stand up from that seated position and back down. So that's that kind of squat-based action. The other option is isolation exercises. So these isolate just one muscle or muscle group during that exercise. So a good example is a bicep curl. And it's even in the name. We are just looking at that one muscle of the biceps muscle. And that is where you're going to hold a dumbbell and you're going to bend the elbow to lift your hand and that dumbbell up towards your shoulder and slowly lower back down. So that is just targeting the bicep muscle. There's not a lot else that's being used within that. And that's the muscle that you're trying to fatigue to get stronger. Some people favor isolation exercises. Some people favor these movement patterns. There is no wrong or right answer, and there's a few pros and cons to each. For me, I tend to push people or guide people towards the movement patterns for the reason that if you are doing the movement pattern, you'll get to work multiple muscle groups within that, which means that you need to do less exercises to have covered the whole body. Whereas you can imagine if you've done one exercise for the bicep, you've still got a lot of the body left to work. So if you then do another isolation exercise of, say, a lateral raise where you hold the dumbbell, lift the arm out to the side, that's working more the deltoids. Get 2 exercises if you've only covered 2 areas of the body or 2 muscles in the body so far. Other examples of isolation ones might be on some of the fixed machines at the gym, like a knee extension or a hamstring curl. We could do calf raises, which just target the calf. You need to do quite a few of them in order to be able to cover that whole body. So it takes a lot longer in the gym, or you need to go maybe fit another gym session in to try and make sure that you've covered the body. The benefit of them is that some people, maybe following an injury, following a previous surgery they've had, there's lots of different factors that might leave one muscle group weaker, or one muscle group on either one side of the body weaker than it should be. And sometimes when we do the movement pattern exercises, other muscles learn to compensate, and actually you're just training them rather than the muscle that you want to get stronger. So that's where I tend to include isolation exercises in sort of in those beginner stages. But for most people, I try and guide you towards the functional movement patterns. So I've added the word functional in there, which I didn't earlier. So they're the movement patterns that I tend to try and push people towards the most, is what we call these functional movement patterns. They mimic exercises or movements that we do on a day-to-day basis. So they make everyday life more functional. So I'm going to introduce those 7 functional movement patterns now. And those 7 are the squat, the hip hinge, the lunge, push, pull, rotation of the body, and carry or gait. Now, what I'm going to do is bring up on the screen for anyone watching on YouTube a video of that will run in the background so you can visualize some of the exercises that I'm doing. And I'm going to do my best for the audio podcast to try and describe what each of those movement patterns might look like. But if you're listening to this and you feel like you haven't quite got what I'm meaning by it, then I do suggest jumping over to YouTube and you can watch this whole video there. So again, the channel is Never Too Old to Lift on YouTube, and you'll be able to find this as episode 9. The first of those movement patterns was a squat. So this is the act of standing up or sitting down, and that is effectively a squat. But we can do that with a surface behind us. So you've got the safety net of that surface, so you're not going to fall backwards or get stuck at the bottom. Or we can take that away and see how deep you can go into the squat. Now, initially, you could do this just body weight. And then as we want to increase the intensity to make sure we're actually building strength, we want to add a weight. Now, this could be in the form of a dumbbell, or as you progress even further with a barbell on your back. There are some other variations, such as front squat, overhead squat, etc. That's kind of going a bit too beyond this initial video. So I would suggest either, like I say, doing it with the surface behind you so you're not going to get stuck there, or just going down to a depth that you feel comfortable. If you've had previous knee issues, you want to make sure you're not going to aggravate those. But yeah, that is the first one, is the squat. Then we come up on to the hip hinge. So the classic version of this is a deadlift. But for some people, that's quite daunting. So you might start with, say, a bridge exercise. It's that act of the hips hinging and extending out. So bridge is where you lay on your back with your knees bent to 90 degrees. And you then push through your heels and lift your hips in the air. So that's the extension of the hips. And then they bend as you come back down again. Then when we got the confidence to, we want to try and ideally come into one of the deadlift variations. So the easiest one to kind of get used to with some dumbbells is the Romanian deadlift. So we are very much hinging at the hips. There's not a lot happening at the knee. So I'm kind of bending forwards by hinging my hips, keeping my back straight with maybe a little bend in the knees. But it's very much come from the hips rather than the knees, which makes it different to a squat. Because the squat, you get some hinge at the hips, but it's very much the knees that are bending that makes it the squat. Where the difference is with this, say, very much coming from the hips. If you can get the Romanian deadlift with good technique, then you can actually then start to come in the conventional deadlift. So that's where the bar starts on the floor. So you have to bend that a little bit lower. And then bending from the hips, you just drive those hips forwards to lift you and that bar back up again. And then you slowly lower that back down to the floor. It is one of the most technical lifts. It's the hardest to get right. So this is one in particular I recommend people spend more time really trying to learn the technique. Spend some time looking at some videos of people doing it, explaining how they do it on these videos, and then trying to mirror that. And don't jump into adding too much weight on that straight away. Try and master the technique first and then gradually build it. But yeah, it's a very important movement pattern. It's one people are nervous of, or they've had a bad experience with in the past, and they tend to leave it out. And actually, if you're leaving out one of these major movement patterns, all the muscle groups associated with that movement pattern just get weaker. And when you go to lift that heavy plant pot off the floor or pick up the suitcase to put in the car, that's when you can cause yourself a problem, because you haven't prepared the body for the things that might happen on a day-to-day basis. Then we come into lunge. So the lunge is that act of having 1 foot ahead of the other, and you're sort of lowering that back knee towards the floor while keeping your body fairly upright. So a good example of this is you're holding a baby, particularly if they've not got much head control. If you try to squat and lean forwards, their head's going to go forwards. And if you're one hand holding them and you're trying to pick something from the floor, this act of trying to keep yourself upright but still getting down to the floor is quite a crucial one. So if you can have, let's say, 1 foot behind, when you're doing this exercise, you don't initially have to start by going all the way to the floor. You might go down to some Pilates blocks or some cushions and just do a half depth one to begin with. And if you can get to the floor, great. And it might be you've got fingertip support on your side to keep the balance. And then as you improve, you can take your hands away and try and see if you can get up and down from the floor without using your hands. And again, this is another classic example of what it's good for, is if you can do a split squat, which is this form of lunge, to the floor and back up again. If you ever fall, you're a lot less likely to get stuck on the floor because you've practiced this act of being able to get up and down from the floor without using your hands. So that's a very crucial one. Again, you can start to add some weight into this. That could be weight in both hands, weight in just one hand, which makes it a little bit more challenging for your abdominals. But yeah, there's a few ideas there. And again, all these are on the video as on YouTube if you're listening to this and you still can't quite picture what I'm saying. Then we come into the push exercise. So the push exercise is either you pushing a weight away from you, such as a chest press or a shoulder press, or you might be pushing yourself away from a surface like a press up, is you're pushing the floor to lift your body up and then lower back down again. So it's very much you're pushing the muscles. So these often associate with the muscles at the front of the chest, the triceps, but these are some, again, very important movement pattern. And if you're struggling with shoulder mobility and you can't get your arm above your head, instead of doing a shoulder press, that's might where you come into the chest press instead. So that might be on a bench. You could do that from the floor. If you haven't got the weights available and you want to do it, then a press up can be a good idea. Again, a lot of people struggle with a full press up. So rather than doing it on the floor, you can actually do it from a kitchen work surface. Or even if that's too hard, you do it from a wall. And the more vertical and upright you are, the easier it is. The more you get into that horizontal position, the harder it is. So you want to find somewhere that is manageable but challenging. Because again, if it's not challenging, you're not going to build the strength. Again, there's more in that in episode 2. Next, we come on to the pull exercise. So this is where you are pulling something towards you against resistance, or you are pulling yourself up towards something like a pull-up. That would be a good example. You're pulling on the bar to lift your chest up to the bar and lower back down again. If you haven't got anything that you could pull towards you, like a resistance band, then what you can do is bend over and hold some dumbbells. So you then lift the dumbbells up towards your chest. So this is it's harder with the dumbbell because you're limited by the direction of gravity, whereas a resistance band gives you a few more options. Or if you're in the gym, a cable machine is even better. But yeah, the classic one is a row. So you might have the arms out at shoulder length, holding the resistance band as I showed a second ago, and pull that towards you. This tends to be associated with the muscles between the shoulder blades or around the shoulder blades. Very important move pattern because it's one of the ones that we don't tend to do a huge amount of on day-to-day life anymore, where you're pulling anything particularly heavy on a regular basis. So they often tend to be one of the first muscle groups to lose their strength. And that can then often have effects on posture, but we don't want one muscle group to lose strength quicker than any others. So actually it's one of the more important ones to do. So even if you start with all the other exercises from home with no equipment, just body weight or things you found around the house, often if you're going to get any equipment, a resistance band is a very good option. And again, I'll put the link to a resistance band set that I recommend in the description of the video below. But yeah, that covers the pull movement pattern. So, and the other option is you can do that using a suspension trainer or TRX, where you pull yourself up towards the handles, and you can change the angle to make that easier. But yeah, so next we go into the rotation exercise. So we can either do a rotation or an anti-rotation exercise. So an anti-rotation exercise is what I'm showing on the screen at the moment, where I've got a band anchored to my side. I've stepped away, holding the band in both hands. So I've got some tension on that band, and I'm pushing my arms away from me. And I'm trying to keep my arms in a straight line away from me, but the band anchored to my side is trying to rotate me round. It's trying to pull me to the side. So I'm having to work those muscles to resist rotation. So it's anti-rotation exercise. And it's very much in the side of the abdominals. You tend to feel this one. Or a progression of that is I can actually use my muscles to create the rotation. So I am holding the band in the same place with the anchor to the side, but I am then actually twisting my body around to create even more tension on the band. And as I do that, rather than resisting rotation, I'm creating the rotation. So we call these trunk rotations. And that anti-rotation exercise is called payload press. Then I could progress that further by making the anchor point of the band a lot higher. So I am now having to create almost like a diagonal force. I'm crunching my abdominals down as I rotate. So it just works them in a slightly different way, but we call these wood choppers or wood chops. And that's another option there. But some form of rotation against resistance, again, is a brilliant exercise. And it's another one where the resistance bands come into play. And they're a really good purchase to have at home because you can get those really inexpensive. In the gym, a cable machine is a better option because you can more easily track the weight that you are lifting. So it's the one where you get a stack of weight plates linked to a cable and you can change the height of the pulley of the cable. And then as you're performing the exercise, you know how many weight plates you chose by pinning the stack of weight plates to choose how many of those are going to lift as you perform the exercise. And it's easier to track, where with a resistance band, if I step half a foot one way or another, it's changed the resistance on the band. So it's harder to monitor. Is it easier because I feel stronger? Or is it easier because actually I wasn't standing quite as far away from the anchor point as I was before? But in terms of a home setup, resistance bands are brilliant. Then that brings me into the last movement pattern, is this gait or carry. So in the video here, I'm holding 2 dumbbells by my side and walking across the length of the room. So this could replicate holding a wheelbarrow and moving that forwards. Again, there's lots of things you might carry in both hands that add some weight, and you're trying to stay upright, keep a good form when you're walking, and it's replicating things you might do on a day-to-day basis. Again, we could just do it with 1 dumbbell. So we call it a suitcase carry, which helps to kind of visualize. You might be holding a suitcase and carrying that across a room. And because the weight's only on one side, there's no counterbalance. It's trying to pull you down to the side. So you have to really use your abdominals to keep yourself upright again. So again, that's a really nice option. A full watering can, they might be 10 litres, so that's 10 kilograms. So practicing with that is a good option. Then we can progress these and do some other variations where we hold the weight above our head. It's a little bit less that we're going to actually do that on a day-to-day basis, but it just provides a different challenge for the muscles. So there we have it. We've got those 7 functional movement patterns that I really like to try and encourage people to include in their workout program. The important thing is, once you've picked and selected those exercises into your workout program, then it is the intensity you perform them at that is going to make them the strengthening exercise. But hopefully that's given you a good idea of some exercises you could include. But like I said, you could include the isolation exercises. If you're not confident doing the exercises because of balance, you can use the fixed machines in a gym. So rather than a squat, you could do a leg press machine. Rather than the shoulder press holding dumbbells, you could use a machine that guides your movement as you're doing it. So there's not going to be any wobble and suddenly risk of falling out to the side. Same with the chest press. Rather than laying on your back and doing it, there's a machine where you can hold and just push the handles forwards again. So there are fixed machine options for them. They tend to be good in the earlier stages if you're nervous about doing it with dumbbells and weights. Doing it with dumbbells or barbells tends to create a stability element that you're working against, which again can be daunting to start with, but actually it's a positive because you're practicing working those stability muscles at the same time as the real powerful strength muscles. So they're ones I recommend we work towards. But yeah, there's so many different exercise variations out there. There are no wrong or right answers, but within a workout program where you're maybe doing 2 workouts per week, ideally you're getting to the 3rd workout per week, we want to try and cover as many muscle groups as possible. So you need to think about that as you're selecting your exercises. Now, if you want any help putting together a program and actually how do we then take those exercise variations I've gone through, put them into a program that you can do, then you might be interested in the free 1 hour masterclass that I have that you can find by going to nevertoldtolift.com/masterclass. It's going to guide you through some more of that kind of basic theory of how do we build strength. And then it's going to come back onto these exercises and give you a better idea about how you might put those into a program. That's it for this week's episode of Never Too Old to Lift podcast. Next week, I have a great interview with you from Kim, who started lifting weights in her 60s and had some fantastic results. So it's a really inspiring story. I'm not going to give anything away now, but make sure you come back next week for that episode. If you found any value in these episodes so far, please do take the time to leave a rating and or a review on whatever podcast player you listen to this on. If you're not already subscribed to the YouTube channel, I do recommend hopping over there and just making sure that you're subscribed so you don't miss any of the episodes coming up, particularly those live Q&A sessions. So if you click the notifications bell, you'll always get notified when I go live. If you've got any questions for me for those live Q&A sessions, please do leave me a message below if you're watching this on YouTube, or send me an email. It's chris@nevertooldtolift.com, and I'll be more than happy to answer those in the next live session. But for now, have a great week, and I will see you with that interview with Kim in the next episode.